The first thing Eleanor Vale said after champagne splashed across her dress was, "If you can sit at that piano and play one real song, Darius, I will marry you right here in front of everybody." For one clean second, the ballroom went silent, then the laughter came loose all at once. Rich people laughing into their champagne, laughing behind their hands, laughing because they thought the joke was free. Darius Cole looked at the pale gold stains spreading across the front of Eleanor's silver gown, then at the black concert grand waiting under the chandeliers, and something in him that had spent years learning how to stay quiet finally stopped backing away. The fundraiser was being held at the Armitage Crown in downtown Chicago, one of those old hotels where the marble floors shine so hard you can see yourself reflected in them, where every room smells faintly like lemon polish, expensive perfume, and somebody else's money. That night, the hotel had been turned into a little kingdom for the Vale Foundation's annual winter benefit, a glossy event raising money for youth arts programs, which sounded wonderful on paper, and probably did help a few people every year. But you know how these things go. Half the room came to donate, and the other half came to be photographed donating. There were politicians near the bar, hedge fund men near the auction tables, women in gowns that looked like they had their own security detail, and a wall of white roses so large it had taken 3 florists and most of the afternoon to build. Darius had been there since before sunrise, moving through service corridors with a gray cleaning cart, changing trash bags, wiping down brass railings, replacing ashtrays nobody was supposed to notice, and making sure the parts of the building guests never looked at stayed clean enough to make their own night feel effortless. He had worked at the Armitage for nearly 6 years, which was long enough to know the hotel had 2 separate maps. There was the map guests saw, red carpets, polished elevators, marble staircases, doormen with gold buttons, and there was the map employees used, freight doors, narrow hallways, break rooms with flickering lights, and elevators that smelled like mop water and hot metal. Darius knew both maps by heart. He knew which stairwell had the best cell signal, which banquet captain would actually say thank you, which kitchen doors slammed too hard, and which guests looked straight through a person like him without even meaning to. Or maybe they did mean to. That was the thing about places like the Armitage. Nobody usually said the ugliest part out loud. They called it policy. They called it security. They called it keeping the event polished. Earlier that evening, his supervisor had caught him rolling his cart near the grand staircase and said, "Darius, buddy, stay off the main floor until the photo line clears, all right?" The word buddy had landed soft enough to sound friendly, but Darius had heard it enough times to know when it meant, "I do not plan to learn your name." He had nodded anyway, because he always nodded, because the job paid better than most janitorial work in the city, because the health insurance covered part of his little sister's medication, because rent did not care whether you had dignity left at the end of the week. "Yes, sir," he had said. Then he rolled his car toward the service elevator, taking the long way around, like he always did. Somewhere in the ballroom, a pianist had been warming up the concert grand. Just a few careful notes, not even a full melody. But Darius had stopped without meaning to. The sound had slid under the doors and into the hallway, warm and clean and familiar enough to hurt. He had stood there with one hand on the handle of his cart, listening to a chord fade into the carpeted corridor. And for a moment, he was not 38 years old in a work shirt with a name tag. He was 17 again, sitting in a practice room after everyone else had gone home, fingers sore. Teacher yelling from the hall, "Again, Darius, do not rush the silence." Then the freight elevator dinged. Somebody called for extra ice, and the moment closed back up. He had pushed the cart forward. That was how he had learned to survive, really. Keep moving before memory gets ideas. By 8:30, the ballroom was full. The foundation's board members stood near the stage, smiling like they had been born under good lighting, and at the center of all of it was Eleanor Vale. Everybody in Chicago knew who she was, or at least knew the shape of her life. Her family owned a chain of luxury hotels, 2 commercial towers, and enough real estate along the lakefront to make people lower their voices when they said the name Vale. Eleanor had inherited the face for television and the kind of confidence that made her room rearrange itself around her. She was in her early 40s, elegant, sharp, always perfectly composed, and for most of the night she'd been carrying herself like she had not spent the entire week putting out fires. She had a board meeting at 7 that morning. A labor dispute sitting in legal review, a reporter she did not trust somewhere in the ballroom, and one major donor who had threatened to pull his money if the foundation leaned too far into what he called social messaging. Eleanor knew every camera angle, every sponsor name, every line in her speech. What she did not know, or maybe had forgotten, was that people cannot be managed the way a schedule can. Darius had seen her once earlier in the evening near the photo wall, watching her public relations director, Mallory Price, adjust the line of donors like furniture. "Keep the staff out of the background," Mallory had said, tapping her clipboard without looking up. "We need a clean shot of the board." Darius had been carrying a tray of empty glasses at the time. He had stepped back behind a column, careful not to make a sound. A woman in diamonds had turned and nearly bumped into him, then sighed like he was a misplaced plant. "Could you go around?" she said. "You are in the light." Darius had moved. A man in a navy tuxedo had held out his car keys and said, "Valet?" Darius had looked at the keys, then at the man. "Valet is at the front entrance, sir." The man blinked, annoyed at having to reset the little picture in his head. "Right. Of course." He took the keys back without apology. Darius did not take it personally anymore. That was what he told himself. You can only take so many things personally before you do not have enough room left to carry groceries. Still, every now and then, something got through. Around 9, while he was clearing glasses near the auction tables, a young donor named Grant Weller had knocked over half a flute of champagne while laughing at something on his phone. The glass rolled under a banquet table, and Darius knelt to reach for it just as Eleanor turned away from a group of cameras. Her elbow moved, the champagne tipped, and the pale gold splash landed across the front of her gown. It was not even much champagne. It barely covered a hand's width of fabric. But at that kind of event, embarrassment travels faster than fire. Eleanor froze. The people around her froze. Darius stood up with the empty glass in one hand and his cleaning towel in the other. "I am sorry, Ms. Vale," he said. Though he had not touched her, had not bumped her, had not even been standing close enough to brush the edge of her dress. Eleanor looked down at the stain, then back at him. Her face tightened, not wildly, not theatrically. "Just enough. You were sorry," she said. "Do you know what this dress costs?" It was the kind of question people ask when they do not want an answer. Grant Weller gave a short laugh and said, "Come on, Eleanor. He could work here 10 years and still not cover the hemming." A few people laughed, and there it was, that little wave of agreement moving through the room. Darius felt it before he heard it. He had known that feeling since he was a kid, that moment when people decide what you are worth before you have opened your mouth. He kept his voice level. "I can have it cleaned, ma'am. I will pay for whatever the hotel says is fair." Eleanor stared at him. She should have let it go. Anybody with sense could see she should have let it go. The dress could be cleaned. The event could move on. But Eleanor had spent her whole life being told she had to stay in command, never look embarrassed, never let a room sense weakness, and something about having a stain on her gown in front of cameras and donors and people she was trying to impress made her want control back immediately. So she looked past Darius toward the concert grand on the stage, and she smiled that polished little smile people use when they want cruelty to sound clever. "Tell you what," she said. "If you can play that piano well enough to impress someone who actually knows music, I will marry you tonight." There it was, not a conversation, not an apology, a spectacle. For a half second, nobody knew whether they were allowed to laugh. Then Grant Weller laughed first, because there is always one person in a room like that who hears the worst thing and decides to make it safer by enjoying it. "You better hope he knows the black keys," he said. Somebody else muttered, "He probably cleans the piano better than he plays it." The jokes rolled in, not loud enough for anyone to admit what they were doing, but loud enough for Darius to hear every word. Near the service entrance, Laverne Brooks stopped folding napkins. Laverne had been head housekeeper at the Armitage for 22 years, and she had seen every kind of rich person come through that hotel, the kind who treated staff like family, and the kind who treated them like wallpaper. She was 63, had silver hair pinned neatly back and a face that could make a careless manager feel 12 years old. She looked at Darius, then at Eleanor, and she did not say anything, because sometimes you are silent, not because you are afraid, but because you are waiting to see who is going to tell the truth first. Darius could have done what he had done 1,000 times before. He could have apologized again. He could have rolled his card away. He could have taken the service elevator down to the loading dock and let the whole ballroom forget he had ever been there. He'd spent years making himself smaller for rooms that never got smaller in return. But something about the piano, something about the laughter, Something about being called buddy and valet and maintenance and anything except a name his mother had given him made the old habit feel impossible. He looked at Eleanor for a long moment. His hands were steady, his chest was not. But nobody could see that. "I do not want to marry you," he said. The laughter softened. Eleanor's smile shifted, just barely. Darius continued, "But if I play, I want you to remember what you said. I want you to keep your word in front of everybody here." Grant snorted. "What does that even mean?" "It means words matter," Darius said, "especially when you have enough money that people are afraid to tell you when you are wrong." That landed harder than anyone expected. You could feel the room trying to decide whether to be offended for Eleanor or impressed with him. Mallory Price stepped forward quickly, like she wanted to smooth the whole thing into something marketable. "Maybe we can keep this light," she said, smiling too hard. "It is a charity event after all." "Right," Grant said, already reaching into his pocket. $500 if he lasts 30 seconds. Another man pulled out cash. "Make it 1,000 if he plays a full song." Money started appearing in hands. Crisp bills flashed like they were all buying tickets to a circus. Darius looked at the money, then at the people holding it. "Cheap it," he said. "I am not taking your bets." Eleanor crossed her arms. "Then what exactly do you want, Darius?" It was the first time she had said his name that night. He noticed. So did Laverne. "I want you to say it clearly," Darius said. "If I play at a professional level, you will keep your word in a way that means something." Eleanor gave a little laugh, but it had lost some of its shine. She had expected a flustered employee, maybe a nervous performance, maybe a quick joke she could turn into a viral moment. She had not expected him to look at her like she was the one being tested. "Fine," she said. "You play. We all watch. And if you are as good as you think you are, I will keep my word." "Say it," Darius said. The ballroom got quieter. "Say it," Darius said. The ballroom got quieter. Eleanor's jaw tightened. She hated being directed, especially by someone she had decided was beneath her 5 minutes earlier. But the phones were out now. Mallory was watching. Donors were watching. And there was a man standing near the front row who had not laughed once. His name was Simon Park, a music critic and retired concert producer whose opinion had enough weight in Chicago to turn a young musician into a headline or a footnote. Simon had arrived late, mostly to satisfy a board member who wanted him there. And up until that moment, he had been half listening to a donor talk about tax credits. Now he was paying attention. Eleanor looked at Darius and said, "I will keep my word." Her voice was calm, but thin around the edges. Darius nodded once. "Thank you." Then he turned toward the stage. 2 security guards stepped into his path before he had taken 3 steps. One of them, a broad-shouldered man named Derek Haynes, held out a hand. "Sir, that area is for performers and guests only." Darius stopped. He did not argue. He just looked past Derek to a young white couple leaning against the side of the stage, taking selfies with the piano in the background. Nobody had told them to move. Derek followed Darius's eyes, then looked back at him. It was not a long moment, but it was long enough. People saw it. Laverne saw it. Simon Park saw it. Eleanor saw it, and for the first time, something uncomfortable moved across her face. Simon stepped forward from the crowd. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Let him through," he said. Derek hesitated. Simon looked at the piano, then back at Darius. "Tonight I would rather hear music than watch security pretend a stage is a border." A few people murmured. Derek lowered his hand. Darius walked past him. The room opened around him not because it had suddenly become fair, not because the people in it had changed their minds, but because everyone wanted to see what happened next. He set his cleaning towel on a side table, removed his black work gloves, and folded them carefully, one over the other. It was a small thing, but Laverne understood it. Those gloves had been part of his uniform, part of the version of himself everybody in the room was comfortable ignoring. He placed them beside the towel, then stepped onto the stage. The concert grand was a Fazioli, black and perfect under the lights, the kind of instrument people talked about like it was a luxury car. Darius placed one hand on the lid. He did not open it right away. In the reflection, he could see the ballroom behind him. Eleanor standing stiff in her ruined gown. Grant Weller with a half smile still stuck on his face. Mallory gripping her clipboard. Simon Park watching without blinking. And Laverne near the service entrance, with her hands clasped together tight enough to hurt. Darius turned back toward the crowd. "My name is Darius Cole," he said. His voice was not loud, but the room carried it. "Not buddy, not buddy, not maintenance, not hey you." Nobody laughed. Then he lifted the lid of the piano, pulled out the bench, and sat down. His hands hovered above the keys for one long, quiet second. And somewhere in the ballroom, a glass settled onto a table with the smallest click. The first note came out so softly that a few people near the back did not even realize he had started. Darius touched the key like he was testing the temperature of water. Then another note followed, low and warm, and the room that had been buzzing with laughter a minute earlier began to settle into itself. He was not playing anything flashy at first, not yet. He started with an old blues progression his grandmother used to hum while cooking Sunday dinner. The kind of melody that did not need a name because it already felt familiar. Slow enough to make people listen. Simple enough to make them uncomfortable with how badly they had misjudged the man sitting in front of them. His left hand moved steady and calm, laying down a quiet rhythm beneath everything, while his right hand drifted above it with a touch so light it almost sounded like somebody speaking from another room. Simon Park leaned forward. Grant Weller stopped smiling. Mallory Price lowered her clipboard an inch without noticing she had done it. And Eleanor, standing near the front in that silver dress with the champagne stain drying across it, felt the first crack in the version of the night she had been trying to control. She had expected bad notes. She had expected nervous hands, maybe a shaky little tune that would give her a way to laugh it off and move on. What she got instead was restraint. Darius did not pound the keys to prove anything. He did not look at the crowd. He did not look at Eleanor. He played like the room had disappeared, and he had finally found a place inside himself that had been waiting in the dark for years. The music moved through the ballroom in a way nobody could organize. Servers stopped in the doorways. The guards at the edge of the stage relaxed their shoulders. A woman who had been recording him turned off her phone and held it against her chest, maybe because the moment suddenly felt too private to turn into content. Darius let a cord hang in the air, then did something strange. He waited, not because he had forgotten what came next, but because he knew exactly what silence could do when people were finally forced to sit inside it. Simon Park understood immediately. His eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but in recognition. The man at the piano knew how to brief with a room. That was not something a person picked up from watching videos online. That was training. That was discipline. That was a life. Darius moved into the second section, and the melody changed shape. It became fuller, more certain, still carrying the blues underneath, but now rising into something brighter, something that sounded like summer heat on old brick sidewalks and windows, open over a city block where people had been trying to make a life out of whatever they had. The music was not sad exactly. It had sadness in it, sure, but it also had memory, pride, stubbornness, and a kind of quiet humor, like it knew the world could be cruel and had decided not to let that be the last thing it said. Laverne was crying by then, though she kept wiping her eyes before anyone could notice. She had seen Darius come in night after night, tired but polite, carrying his lunch in the same faded blue bag, never complaining when someone gave him extra work, never speaking about where he had been before the Armitage. She knew he had a past because everybody did, but she had never pushed him. Some stories sit inside a person so long that you learn not to knock on the door unless they open it themselves. At the piano, Darius let the final phrase fall away gently. No big ending, no dramatic flourish, just one last note and then nothing. For a moment, the ballroom stayed perfectly still. It was not the awkward silence from before. This silence had weight. It made people aware of their own breathing. Then someone clapped once. It was Simon Park. Just one sharp clap, measured and clear. A second clap came from the far side of the room, then another. In less than 10 seconds, the applause rose across the ballroom. Not polite gala applause, not the kind people give while checking who else is watching, but real applause, loud enough to make the chandeliers tremble. Darius did not stand. He kept his hands resting in his lap and looked down at the keys as if he was still listening to the music fade. Grant Weller stared at him with the face of a man who had just learned the joke was on him. Eleanor looked at Simon, hoping maybe he would say something vague, something safe, something she could use to pull the night back onto familiar ground. Simon did not give her that. He stood, straightened his jacket, and said, "That was not luck. That was not hidden talent. That was professional musicianship." You could feel the sentence move through the room. The reporters near the bar looked up. Phones came back out. Mallory's eyes widened just a little. Eleanor felt her stomach drop, not because she did not believe Darius had played well, but because she understood what Simon's words meant. The challenge was no longer a joke. It had witnesses now. It had credibility. It had consequences. She stepped toward the microphone near the stage, forcing a smile back onto her face. "Well," she said, trying to sound amused, "that was certainly unexpected." A few people laughed, but the sound came out thin and uncertain. Darius looked up at her. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Eleanor adjusted the microphone in her hand. "I think we can all agree, Mr. Cole has surprised us tonight, and I am sure the Foundation would be happy to support any future musical opportunities he may want to pursue." It was a beautiful sentence, the kind public relations people loved, polished, generous, empty in exactly the right places. Darius stood slowly from the bench. "That is not what you promised," he said. There was no anger in his voice, which somehow made it worse for Eleanor. She had been ready for anger. Anger she knew how to manage. Calm made her nervous. "Darius," she said, lowering her voice, "I was obviously speaking in the heat of the moment." "You were," he said, "and I was standing there when you said it." A few people in the crowd shifted. Grant looked down at his drink. Mallory stepped closer to Eleanor and whispered something, but Eleanor barely heard it. Her mind was moving fast now, calculating angles, statements, headlines, what donors would say, what the board would say, how quickly a 10-second video could become a week-long mess. She could already imagine the captions. "Billionaire humiliates hotel worker. Heiress loses bet to janitor. Rich woman makes cruel marriage dare." None of it would be exactly fair, maybe, but none of it would be completely wrong either. She tried one more time to laugh it away. "Surely nobody thinks I am literally required to marry someone because of a silly comment at a fundraiser." The room went quiet again, but this time it was not music holding it together, it was discomfort. Darius nodded. "No," he said, "nobody gets to force anybody into marriage. That is not what I am asking for." Eleanor looked relieved for half a second. Then he continued, "I am asking you to keep your word in a way that means you understand what you did." The relief vanished. Simon Park stepped closer to the stage, his hands folded in front of him. "That seems reasonable," he said. "This is not about a wedding. It is about whether people in this room believe public humiliation can be fixed with a joke and a check." A woman near the auction tables murmured, "He is right." Another voice answered, "She should apologize." Grant Weller, who had spent the last 10 minutes wishing he could disappear into the carpet, said nothing. His face had gone pale. Eleanor looked around the room and realized something she had not felt in years. She was losing it. Not money, not power, not even reputation, not yet. She was losing the room. The people who had spent the evening waiting for her approval were now waiting to see what she would do. Darius turned back toward the piano. "I have 2 more pieces," he said. "After that, we can talk about what keeping your word looks like." Eleanor wanted to say no. She wanted to call security, cut the microphones, announce the auction, blame the chaos on a misunderstanding, do anything that would return the night to the script she had rehearsed. But then Simon Park looked at her, and Mallory whispered, "If you stop him now, it will look worse." So Eleanor said nothing. Darius sat down again. This time, he did not ease into it. He started with something clean and structured, a classical piece with sharp edges and no room to hide. His hands moved faster now, but never wildly. The left hand built a pulse underneath, precise and steady, while the right hand climbed through the upper register with the kind of control that made even people who knew nothing about music understand they were watching someone do something difficult. The piece rose and tightened, almost like a conversation between 2 people who had been avoiding the truth too long. Darius played one phrase gently, then answered it with another that carried more force, more certainty. It felt like somebody walking into a room where they had always been ignored and deciding they were not leaving until everyone looked up. Simon stood perfectly still. He knew the work. He knew how hard it was. He also knew Darius was not simply playing it correctly. He was playing it like a man who had spent years holding something back and had finally stopped asking permission to be heard. Eleanor watched his hands and felt memories she had not invited into the room. She was 9 years old again, sitting at an old upright piano in her parents' house. Her father standing behind her with his arms crossed while the teacher told her to start over because she had rushed through the quiet part. Eleanor had hated those lessons. She hated the pauses. She hated being told to listen before moving forward. In her world, silence had always meant weakness, hesitation, losing ground. But Darius made silence feel different. He used it like strength. He gave the notes space and made everyone wait for them. By the time he reached the final section, nobody in the ballroom was whispering anymore. Not the donors, not the reporters, not the staff. Even Derek Haynes, the guard who had blocked Darius from the stage, stood with his hands folded in front of him, staring at the piano with an expression that looked almost ashamed. The last run came fast, then slowed, then ended with a clean, deliberate chord. This time, the applause broke out before the sound had fully disappeared. People stood. Not everybody, not at first, but enough. Simon was on his feet. Laverne was on her feet. Then one row rose, then another, until even some of the people who had laughed earlier were standing because sitting down would have felt like admitting they had not understood what had just happened. Darius stood and gave a small nod, nothing dramatic. He was not soaking it in. He looked exhausted, almost surprised, like the music had reached a part of him he had spent years trying not to touch. Then Grant Weller said, loud enough for people to hear, "I owe you an apology." Darius turned toward him. Grant swallowed. He looked like a man trying to find words he had never practiced using. "What I said before, about the keys, about you cleaning the piano, that was ugly. I knew it was ugly when I said it. I just wanted people to laugh." Darius studied him for a moment. "Then do better next time," he said. It was not forgiveness exactly, but it was not cruelty either. Grant nodded quickly, grateful for even that much. Mallory was staring at her phone now. Notifications kept flashing across the screen. Clips of the first performance had already begun moving online. Somebody had posted Eleanor's marriage dare. Somebody else had posted Darius saying his name. The comments were coming fast. Some defended Eleanor. Some attacked her. Some called Darius a hero before they knew anything about him. Mallory leaned close to Eleanor. "This is spreading," she whispered. "We need a statement." Eleanor kept her eyes on Darius. "Not yet," she said. "We need to know who he is." Simon heard her. "I can tell you part of that," he said. The room quieted again. He looked at Darius, waiting for permission. Darius did not answer right away. His eyes moved toward Laverne. She was still standing near the service entrance, hands clasped in front of her. She gave him the smallest nod. It was not a command. It was not a pressure. It was just a way of saying, "You do not have to carry this alone anymore." Simon turned toward the crowd. "Darius Cole was a student at the Chicago Conservatory almost 20 years ago," he said. A murmur ran through the ballroom. "He was one of the strongest young pianists I had heard in a long time. He played with maturity most musicians spend decades chasing." Eleanor stared at Darius. "You went to the conservatory?" she asked. Darius gave a small smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "For a while." Simon continued. "He did not leave because he lacked talent. He left because life has a way of sending bills before it sends opportunities." Laverne finally stepped forward. She did not like attention, and everybody who knew her could see it, but she had watched Darius be turned into a joke in front of a room full of strangers, and she was done letting people tell only the version of him that made them comfortable. "His mother got sick," she said. Her voice was steady, but the room had to lean in to hear her. "Real sick. He was working 2 jobs when he was still in school. Then the hospital bills started piling up, and he sold the piano he had saved for since he was a kid." Darius closed his eyes for a moment. Laverne kept going. "After his mama passed, he did not go back. He said every time he sat at a piano, all he could hear was the hospital monitor. So he took jobs where nobody asked him to play. Nobody moved. The story did not make Darius look smaller. It made everyone else look at him differently. Suddenly, the work shirt, the cleaning cart, the service elevator, all of it became impossible to separate from the person who had been carrying it." Eleanor looked down at the stain on her dress. It was almost dry now. A few minutes ago, it had felt like the biggest problem in the room. Now it looked small, embarrassingly small. She thought about the rules she had signed off on. Staff stay out of photos. Service elevators during guest arrivals. No employees near the donor entrance unless assigned. She had always called those things logistics. She had never asked what they felt like from the other side. Darius stepped away from the piano and faced the crowd. "I do not want pity," he said. "I did what I had to do. A lot of people do. They work jobs nobody notices. They take care of family. They keep moving because stopping costs too much." He looked at Eleanor. "But I am tired of people acting like a uniform tells them the size of a person." Eleanor could not answer. Not honestly. Not yet. Mallory's phone buzzed again, then again. She checked it and her face changed. "There are reporters outside," she said, "and they are asking for both of you." Grant muttered, "Well, that is not good." Simon gave him a look. "It could be worse," he said. "They could be asking because nobody cared." Darius looked toward the ballroom doors, where flashes of light were already beginning to flicker through the glass. Then he looked back at Eleanor. "We should talk somewhere quiet," he said. A few people in the crowd immediately protested. Somebody called out, "No, do it here." Another shouted, "Keep your word." The room started to lean towards spectacle again, hungry for a clean ending, a villain, a hero, a clip they could post before midnight. Darius raised one hand. The crowd settled, not completely, but enough. "I do not want this turned into a circus," he said. "Not for me, not for her. If she's going to make it right, she needs to understand what that means when nobody is clapping." Eleanor looked at him then, really looked at him. And for the first time that night, she saw no anger in his face, no hunger for revenge, no attempt to humiliate her the way she had humiliated him. She saw a man giving her a door out. Not an easy door, not a painless one, but a real one. She nodded slowly. "All right," she said. "We talk." Mallory led them toward the private conference room upstairs, with Derek clearing a path through cameras and guests. Laverne watched Darius pass and reach for his hand for just a second. "You all right?" she asked. Darius looked back at the piano, then at the room full of people who were finally learning his name. "I do not know," he said quietly, "but I think I am done pretending I am not here." Then the conference room door closed behind him and Eleanor, cutting off the noise of the ballroom, the applause, the cameras, the phones, and the whole messy crowd waiting outside for someone to decide what justice was supposed to look like. The conference room on the second floor had been built for people who liked bad news delivered softly. It had a long walnut table, leather chairs nobody ever leaned back in, a wall of windows looking down over Michigan Avenue, and a framed black and white photo of the Armitage Crown from 1928. Back when the hotel had been the kind of place where men smoked in the lobby and women in gloves were expected to smile through anything. Eleanor closed the door behind them and stood with both hands pressed against the edge of the table. For the first time all night, there were no cameras pointed at her, no donors waiting for her smile, no microphone close enough to rescue her with a polished sentence. Just her, Darius, Mallory, Simon Park, and the low sound of the city moving below them. Mallory was already on her phone, pacing by the window like she could outwalk the crisis. "The clip has crossed 3 million views," she said. "Local news picked it up. National accounts are reposting it, and the board chair has called 6 times. Eleanor did not look at her. "Put the phone down for 2 minutes. Mallory stopped pacing. That alone told Darius more about Eleanor than any gossip column ever could. A woman like her did not tell people to put phones down. She told them to answer faster. Simon took a seat near the end of the table, but did not lean back. He had the calm expression of a man who had spent a lifetime watching talented people get mishandled by institutions. Darius stayed standing. He did not want the chair. Something about sitting across from Eleanor in a room like this felt too much like a job interview, and he had spent enough of his life being interviewed by people who had already decided what they thought of him. Eleanor finally looked at him. The champagne stain on her dress had dried into a faint shadow across the fabric, but now it did not look expensive. It just looked human. "All right," she said. "Tell me what you want." Darius let out a slow breath. "That is the wrong question." Eleanor blinked. "Then what is the right one? Ask what needs to change." Mallory gave a tight little laugh, the kind people make when they are nervous and trying to disguise it as skepticism. "With respect, that is a pretty broad request." Darius looked at her. "It is broad because the problem is broad." He walked to the window and looked down at the street. Tiny headlights moved through the traffic, people rushing home, delivery drivers double parked, somebody standing under an awning with a paper bag in one hand and a phone in the other. Normal life was happening down there while upstairs. 5 people were trying to decide whether one ugly moment in a ballroom would become another forgotten scandal, or something else entirely. "I do not want your money," Darius said. "I do not want a private check, and I do not want a fancy title you can take back when this gets inconvenient. I want you to stop treating the people who work for you like they are part of the furniture." Eleanor folded her arms, not defensively at first, more like she was bracing herself. "We do not treat our staff badly." "You do not have to scream at somebody to make them feel small," Darius said. "You do not have to fire them to make them invisible. Sometimes all you have to do is decide they are not supposed to be in the room." The words sat there. Mallory looked down. Simon did not move. Eleanor's eyes shifted toward the black and white hotel photo on the wall, maybe because it was easier than looking at Darius. The photo policy is for privacy and presentation, she said quietly. The service elevator policy is for flow and security. I know, Darius said. That is the thing. Every rule sounds reasonable when you are standing on the side that wrote it. Eleanor opened her mouth, then stopped. Darius continued, not louder, just steadier. You want to know what it feels like from our side? It feels like being told you can clean the ballroom but not stand in it. It feels like having people hand you their coats without looking at your face. It feels like people calling you buddy, because learning your name would mean admitting you are a person with a life they never bothered to imagine. Mallory looked up. Not everybody does that. No, Darius said. Not everybody. But enough people do that the rest of us have learned how to make ourselves smaller before they get the chance. Simon nodded once. That is the part people miss, he said. Bias is rarely announced like a villain in a movie. Most of the time it comes dressed as efficiency. Eleanor sat down slowly. She looked tired now, not the tiredness of late meetings or bad press, but something older. She had spent years being the person in charge of everything, and suddenly she was sitting in a room where control was not helping her. So what would change look like, she asked. This time, she sounded like she meant it. Darius looked at Simon, then at Mallory, then back to Eleanor. First, you apologize in public. Not a statement that says you regret if anyone felt offended. You say what you did. You say my name. You say it was wrong. Mallory flinched. That could create legal exposure. It already created exposure, Simon said. The cameras just made it visible. Darius held up a hand before the room could turn into an argument. Second, you make something real for kids who get pushed out before anybody sees what they can do. A scholarship fund, independent board, no giant portrait of you on the brochure, no calling it a gift from the Vale family like you invented kindness. Eleanor almost smiled despite herself. You have thought about this. I have had a lot of time to think in hallways people do not notice. And third, she asked. Darius looked down at his hands. For a moment, the room was quiet enough to hear the air system humming above them. Third, you changed the way this hotel treats people when nobody important is watching. Better wages, better overnight benefits, a real place for staff to speak up without getting punished for it. Training for managers, including you, and no more rules that treat employees like they are embarrassing background noise. Mallory sat down at last. Her phone kept buzzing on the table between them, but nobody picked it up. Eleanor stared at Darius for a long time. You are asking me to rebuild the culture of a company because I made one cruel comment. Darius shook his head. No. I am asking you to rebuild it because your comment did not come out of nowhere. That one hurt. You could see it. Eleanor leaned back in the chair and closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, the sharpness was still there, but something else had moved in beside it. Fear, maybe, or honesty. My father used to say that a business is a machine, she said. He said the people who run it need to keep their hands clean, keep their emotions out, and never let the machine hear them hesitate. Simon gave a dry little laugh. That sounds like a miserable way to live. It was, Eleanor said. But it worked. Darius looked at her. Worked for who? She did not answer right away. Then she glanced toward the door, toward the ballroom below, toward all the people who had spent the night waiting for her to explain herself. Not for enough people, she said. Outside the conference room, the hallway had become crowded with staff, reporters, board members, and guests pretending they were only passing by. Mallory finally picked up her phone and looked at the messages. Her face changed again. The board chair wants you to issue a short statement. Nothing specific, something about respect and moving forward. Legal wants you to avoid the word discrimination, avoid the word promise, avoid any commitment that could be interpreted as binding. Eleanor gave a quiet laugh, but there was no humor in it. Of course they do. Simon stood. They are trying to protect you. No, Eleanor said. They are trying to protect the company. Then she looked at Darius, and maybe that is the problem. She reached for a notepad near the end of the table and began writing. At first her handwriting was quick and neat, the kind of writing of someone used to taking notes in meetings. Then it slowed. Mallory watched her in disbelief. What are you doing? Writing what I am going to say. Eleanor, we should draft this with legal. No. Her voice was calm, but it had changed. Legal can review the policy documents. They do not get to write my conscience. Darius watched her put down the pen. She had made a list, not vague promises, dates, names, steps. She looked at him again. I cannot undo what I said tonight, she told him. I cannot undo what I said tonight, she told him. I cannot erase the years before it either, but I can stop pretending this is just a bad clip." Darius nodded once. "That is a start." When they walked back toward the ballroom, the sound hit them before the doors opened. People were talking over each other. Reporters were calling out questions. Phones were held in the air like a field of little blue lights. The second Eleanor stepped through the doors, the room went quiet in that strange way a crowd does when it senses something important might happen. Darius walked beside her, not behind her, not ahead of her, just beside her. Simon moved to the front row. Laverne stood near the staff entrance with her hands folded, her eyes fixed on Eleanor. Mallory stayed a few steps back, pale and silent, probably calculating 100 different ways this could go wrong. Eleanor reached the microphone. For a moment she looked at the ballroom, then at the cameras, then down at the notes in her hand. She folded the paper once and set it beside the mic. "I am Eleanor Vale," she said. "And tonight, I was wrong." No one moved. No one even breathed too loudly. "I was wrong when I spoke to Darius Cole as if he was not a person. I was wrong when I used my position, this event, and the attention of this room to embarrass him. I was wrong when I treated a cruel joke like it was harmless, because I assumed I could control the way it landed." The words came out clean, no apology wrapped in excuses, no soft cushion under the truth. Mallory closed her eyes for half a second. Somewhere in the back, a reporter lowered his phone just enough to make sure he had heard correctly. Eleanor kept going. "Marriage is not a prize, and is not a prize, and it is not a punishment. Nobody should be pressured into it, and I will not pretend my words created an obligation like that. But Darius is right about something. A promise means nothing if you only keep it when it is comfortable. So I am going to keep mine through action." She turned slightly toward Darius. "Not because he forced me to, because he should not have had to ask." Laverne looked down for a moment, and when she looked back up, her eyes were wet. Eleanor raised the page in her hand, but she did not read it like a speech. She read it like somebody taking responsibility for a debt. "Starting tomorrow, the Armitage Crown will end the policy that keeps staff out of public areas and photo lines unless there is a real safety reason. Managers will address employees by name. Service elevator restrictions will be reviewed, and no one will be treated like a security risk simply because they are working." A murmur rolled through the staff gathered near the walls. Some looked doubtful. Some looked awful. Within 30 days, the Vale Foundation will create the Darius Cole Arts Fund, independently managed, to support young musicians from low-income families, especially students who have had to leave programs because life got expensive before their talent had a chance to grow. Darius looked at her sharply. He had not asked for the fund to carry his name. Eleanor noticed. "You can refuse it," she said quietly into the microphone. "But I hope you do not. People deserve to know where this began." Darius did not answer yet. He was still trying to understand what it felt like to hear his name used as something other than a label on a work shirt. Eleanor went on. "We will launch a free community concert program in South and West Side neighborhoods with full pay for musicians, technicians, and crews. We will also begin mandatory bias and workplace respect training for all management, including me, and we will publish the results of employee feedback surveys every quarter." A man near the bar muttered, "That is a lot of money." Simon turned his head toward him. "Yes," he said. "Respect usually costs more than a press release." A few people laughed, but this time it was different, not cruel, not aimed downward. Eleanor let the room settle. "We are raising wages for overnight staff and adding health support for employees working late shifts. We are creating an anonymous reporting line that goes directly to an independent review panel. And once a month, I will sit down with the people who clean this hotel, cook in its kitchens, work its doors, run its laundry, handle its security, and keep this place alive, and I will listen before I speak." She paused, "Not because it is good public relations, because I should have done it years ago." That was the moment the room changed again. Not everyone clapped, not right away. Some people looked skeptical, and honestly, they had every right to be. A few guests whispered that she was only doing it because the cameras were on. Grant Weller stood near the side wall with his hands jammed into his pockets, looking like he wanted to say something but did not know where to begin. Darius finally stepped toward the microphone. Eleanor handed it to him without hesitation. He held it for a moment, then looked over the crowd. "I appreciate the apology," he said, "and I appreciate the plan, but I want to say something before everybody decides this is a happy ending." The room went still again. Darius looked at the staff first, then at the guests, then at the reporters who had already begun drafting headlines in their heads. A scholarship does not erase what happened. A concert does not erase what happened. A concert does not fix every person who has been ignored. Training does not mean people suddenly stop carrying the same old habits into the room with them. This only matters if it happens when nobody is filming. He turned to Eleanor. I will help if you want me to, but I am not here to make you look better. I am here to make sure you do better. Eleanor nodded. Fair. Darius looked down at the microphone, then back up. And I do not want pity. I do not want anybody calling me inspirational because I played a few songs after being humiliated. There are people working in this building tonight with stories bigger than mine. There are cooks, housekeepers, security guards, maintenance crews, people on buses before sunrise, people going home after midnight, people who have had to bury parts of themselves just to make rent. Do not wait until they are standing on a stage to treat them like they matter. There was no applause at first, just silence. Then Laverne began clapping, slowly, steadily. Derek, the security guard, joined her, then the servers, then people near the front. The applause grew, but it did not feel like celebration. It felt like recognition. Eleanor looked toward Laverne. Ms. Brooks, she said. Laverne raised an eyebrow. Laverne, she corrected her. The ballroom laughed softly. Eleanor nodded. Laverne, she said again. Thank you for telling the truth. Laverne gave her a long look. Start saying it tomorrow, not just tonight. Eleanor took that in. I will. At that moment, the door near the photo wall opened and two members of the hotel board stepped inside. You could tell who they were by the way they moved. Expensive suits, careful faces, the kind of people who believed they were not interrupting because they owned part of the room. The older one, a silver-haired man named Charles Venn, walked straight toward Eleanor. We need to speak privately, he said. Now. Eleanor did not move. You can say it here. Charles glanced at the cameras. This is not the place. Actually, Eleanor said, it is exactly the place. The room leaned in. Charles's smile tightened. You are making commitments without board approval. I am making commitments to treat people decently. You are creating a major financial obligation based on a viral incident. Darius watched Eleanor carefully. This was the real test, not the applause, not the mic, not the statement. This was the moment when the people who had helped build the machine showed up to see if she would step back inside it. Eleanor looked at Charles, then at the staff along the walls. No, she said. I am responding to a problem that existed before tonight. Tonight just made it impossible to ignore. Charles lowered his voice. Do not let the internet run your company. Eleanor gave him a tired, almost sad smile. The internet did not write the rules that made people feel invisible in this hotel. We did. Charles stared at her. Then, he looked at Darius, as if seeing him for the first time. And you, he said, you should be careful about turning a personal grievance into a corporate demand. Darius could have snapped. Everybody expected him to. Instead, he looked at Charles and said, I am not asking for a favor. I am asking why it takes a ballroom full of strangers to make a company treat its workers like human beings. Charles had no answer, not one he could say into a microphone. He turned and walked out, his shoes clicking across the marble until the doors closed behind him. The sound was small, but it felt like something had shifted. Eleanor stood there for another moment, then looked at Darius. Would you play one more piece? She asked. Darius glanced at the piano. He had not planned to. His hands still carried the ache of the earlier music, and part of him wanted to leave before the night turned him into something people could package and sell. But then he saw Laverne. He saw Derek. He saw the young server near the wall who had been holding a tray all night and trying not to cry. He saw the sign by the service corridor that read Staff Access Only, the same corridor he had spent 6 years using because it was easier for everybody else if people like him stayed out of sight. He walked back to the piano. One more, he said, but not for her. He sat down. This time, he did not play a famous piece. He played something that sounded like the city after midnight. Trains humming in the distance, shoes on wet pavement, somebody laughing too loud outside a corner store, mothers waiting up for children who worked late, men in uniforms eating dinner from vending machines, women taking off their shoes on buses because their feet hurt, people carrying whole lives nobody in the ballroom had ever asked about. The melody began simple, 4 notes rising, falling, then rising again, like someone trying to stand after a hard day. His left hand kept a slow rhythm under it, steady as footsteps in a hallway. The song grew warmer as it went. Not triumphant exactly, but hopeful in the way real hope is hopeful. Careful, tired, stubborn, refusing to disappear even when it has every reason to. Eleanor did not stand near the microphone this time. She walked down from the stage and sat in the third row between Derek and one of the banquet servers. She put her phone face down in her lap. No cameras followed her there because the cameras were all pointed at Darius, but Laverne saw it. So did Simon. And Darius, halfway through the piece, opened his eyes and noticed her sitting where nobody had asked her to sit. He did not smile. He just kept playing. When the final note faded, nobody rushed to clap. The room held the silence for a few seconds, maybe because they had finally learned that silence did not always need to be filled. Then the applause began, low at first, then fuller, spreading through the ballroom without anyone needing to lead it. Darius stood and gave a small bow. Simon walked to the edge of the stage and said, "That was the best part of the night." A reporter near the front asked, "Because of the performance?" Simon shook his head. Because for once the music was not the ending, it was the beginning. The gala did not become perfect after that. It would have been easy to tell the story that way, to say everybody changed overnight, every rule vanished, every person who had laughed became wiser before dessert. That would be nice, but it would not be true. Some donors left early. Some board members were furious. Online, people argued for days. Some said Eleanor deserved to lose everything. Some said Darius should have demanded more. Some said he should have accepted the money. Others said the apology was just another performance from a rich woman who knew how to survive a bad headline. And maybe some of them had a point. The first concert was scheduled 3 weeks later at a neighborhood arts center on the south side. The scholarship board had not been formed yet. The wage changes had to be reviewed. The board was still fighting Eleanor behind closed doors. None of it was guaranteed. But the next morning, before the hotel opened its front doors, Eleanor walked into the employee entrance wearing a plain dark coat and no makeup crew. No photographer, no assistant holding a phone. She found Laverne in the break room pouring coffee. "Morning," Eleanor said. Laverne looked up, surprised. "Morning." Eleanor nodded toward the hallway. "Can you show me where the service elevator is?" Laverne stared at her for a second, then she smiled, just a little. "You have been in this building your whole life." "I know," Eleanor said. "That is the problem." Laverne picked up her coffee and motioned down the hall. "Come on then." Darius was already there, leaning against the wall with his hands in his jacket pockets, waiting for the early shift to begin. Eleanor saw him and stopped. For a moment, none of them said anything. Then she looked at him and said, "Good morning, Darius." He nodded. "Good morning, Eleanor." The elevator doors opened with a tired old groan. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed, the floor was scratched, and somebody had taped a crooked sign near the buttons that read, "Please close door gently." It was not glamorous, it was not designed for photographs. But for the first time in a long time, it held 3 people who were finally looking at one another without pretending somebody did not belong there. And that is where the story really leaves us. Not with a wedding, not with a fairy tale, not with a billionaire suddenly becoming a saint because she gave one good speech, but with a question that is harder than applause. When someone hurts another person with the power they have, what does making it right actually look like? Is an apology enough, or do they owe something bigger? And if they do change, how long should people wait before believing them? Tell me what you think in the comments. Was Eleanor taking real responsibility? Or was she just trying to save her image after getting caught? Was Darius right to give her a chance to fix it? Or should he have walked away and let the whole system burn? Share this story with somebody who has ever been treated like they were invisible, and subscribe for more stories about dignity, power, and the moments when ordinary people finally decide they are done standing in the background.